At least 352 people have been killed in Ukraine following Russia's invasion, and 14 of those killed are children. A further 1,684 people, including 116 children, have been injured. Now, let's discuss the impact of conflict on children. We go live now to Lviv in Ukraine. We're joined by James Elder, UNICEF's spokesperson. James, thank you so much for your time this afternoon and for agreeing to speak to us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining.
Now, I can only imagine you are probably, at the storm of this crisis that we are currently seeing unfolding. It's now entering day 5. Now, before we talk about just the impact of conflict on children, talk to us about what has been your experience there. I know that 2 of the biggest cities in the Ukraine are actually the ones that are impacted. We know that several people have already been killed. Where exactly are you? Let's try and see if we can locate where you are from the conflict and from the 2 cities that were particularly invaded by Russia.
Yeah, so I'm in a city called Lviv, which is in the west of the country, a real sort of hub of university and cultural life for hundreds of years here. You'll see my eyes wandering every now and then. It's an increasing military build-up, so I just want people to be happy that I'm using a camera. Lviv at the moment is peaceful. I mean, the communities are building roadblocks. A lot of families women are on the streets cooking food for people who are coming through the city. It's about 600 kilometers from Kiev and only 80 kilometers from the Polish border. So it's a very big route for many, many thousands of people coming through here. They're catching the train from Kiev, which is absolutely packed, hoping then to get onto Poland. It's 50 kilometers a queue of road to get into Poland. It's about 24 hours at least in the vehicle there. Sorry.
Can we ask you?
Yes, of course. I work for UNICEF, United Nations.
Document.
Of course. He's got my document. So I'm just doing live television.
Yeah.
No problem. Can I continue?
Ви можете продовжувати зараз нашу
Думаю, що поки що ні. А тут чисто
Please, we have to.
заборонено
Of
зараз.
course.
Yes, we have to check your documents.
Of course.
And you can.
Guys, I'll just pause here and we'll kick off again in a few minutes. Sorry, everyone.
All right. Of course, this is live television, and we were speaking to UNICEF's spokesperson there, James Elder. He is in a city called Lviv in Ukraine, and he's obviously describing how peaceful and quiet that particular city is. And of course, James speaking to us there about the impact of conflict, on children. I see authorities are obviously on high alert in that particular city. We know, of course, now that 2 of the biggest cities in Ukraine have been invaded by Russia, and that's where we're reporting at least 352 people have been killed in Ukraine, and we know that of those 352, 14 of them are children. Over 1,680 people have been injured, and 116 of them are children. If you have been watching visuals for the past four days, as we are entering the 5th day of the invasion by Russia into Ukraine, you would have seen the desperate scenes coming out of Ukraine as people were making their way to neighboring countries. A lot of those people are currently in Poland. We obviously are monitoring the situation very, very closely. I believe James is back with us. James, thank you so much for joining us. Can we continue?
Police, of course, it's a conflict zone, and they need to know who's walking around with cameras and so on. So that's where I am. It's a real thoroughfare. Yesterday, I spent a lot of time at the train station talking to families, and as people approach the border, it was a real day of sadness, to be honest. The train station sort of echoing in tears as husbands farewelled wives and fathers farewell 7-year-old daughters or 12-year-old sons. All of these professionals, one woman said, I'm a physiotherapist from Kiev. I want to be treating my patients tomorrow, not fleeing my country. So, as a lady said to me on the street who was cooking food for people, Ukrainians are crying together but standing together.
And I mean, as we've seen, just the scenes that we've been seeing in the past couple of days, Ukrainians obviously being praised for their resilience, and their resolve. If they were not at least helping those some of their citizens, get out of the country, some of the cities that have been invaded, some were standing ground saying, that they are not going anywhere. I would imagine not only does this particular crisis and conflict have an impact on children, but also adults who have a duty to protect the infrastructure, to protect their lives.
Yeah, of course. The levels of stress I see on people, your viewers will have they've seen family members in difficult situations, and you see that, and the mums and dads try so hard to keep that stress from their children. But there's a breaking point, of course, after days of travel, or for mum and dad and children in cities like the capital, days in a bunker. You said at the start of your program, there's the real risk to children, that risk to children who are in bunkers or who are at risk of being caught in this conflict remains very real in multiple cities. So right now, whilst it's very laudable, those Ukrainians supporting one another and that international support, we want children at night time asleep in their beds, not in bunkers. We want them hearing a school bell, not an air raid siren. So all those things, for that to happen, the conflict needs to stop.
And I mean, for us, who are sitting here, we know firsthand, we've seen the conflict in various parts of, the world where children have been adversely affected. I mean, we know what has happened to the children of Syria, as an example, and other African, countries that have been in war for many, many years. But let's now just go back to the impact of conflict on children, particularly in Ukraine. I mean, we've seen some children initially looking very happy as they in the bus, waving as they go from one country into another. Some children finding it as an adventure, walking, into Poland. But what does it actually mean for them, especially in this initial stage? I mean, one mother was being interviewed and she said that whilst her child is seeming fine now, she's sure that this is going to lead to some form of trauma for him.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, all children deal with it differently. And it's been a really big focus of UNICEF's work here in Ukraine and neighbouring countries where people will go to. That psychological support cannot be underestimated for children, not forgetting that children, whether they're here or in South Africa or in Japan or the United States, have also suffered 2 years of COVID and all that stress. So some children, mothers told me in the last couple of days, they just sleep a lot more. Some children are crying a lot more. Some children, as I met a mother yesterday who wasn't coping well at all, and it was her 7-year-old daughter who was telling her, "Mum, it's going to be okay." And some, as you say, yes, in the early stages see it as an adventure, and others fatigue pretty quickly. The adventure runs thin after a couple of days at a border. So all children will tend to show signs slightly differently, but that's what UNICEF's work is, to work with municipalities across Ukraine. It's like where I am now at a reception centre where the Ukrainians, the locals here, are bearing the brunt of trying to find that support for the families who have arrived on their way maybe to another country, but for now they're here and they don't have family and they need that support.
Now, James, we're obviously getting various reports in terms of the number of people that are now essentially refugees, coming from Ukraine. Some numbers up to 400,000. We understand that it could be as much as 250,000. We know that at the last tally yesterday, it was over 160,000 people just in Poland had gotten in there. And the United Nations Refugee Agency saying, if this, crisis continues, if this war continues to escalate or the situation worsens, they could be dealing with up to 4 million refugees. Now, from your experience working for UNICEF, what kind of humanitarian situation are you facing now as you are in Ukraine?
Well, that would be they're extraordinary numbers, of course. So it's a crisis here. And then, of course, those neighbouring countries which have been so very good at the moment in welcoming Romania's, Poland's, Moldova, and so on. But if the numbers were to maintain, as you're saying, and based on those reports from High Commission of Refugees, then that's a refugee crisis again, and no one wants to see that. Most of all, those people here in Ukraine who don't want to leave. So, those countries will do all they can. Agencies like UNICEF are already, I know we've got trucks of supplies and support going into Poland as I speak. And there'll be enormous support, you would hope, from donor countries. But the world's attention right now needs to be on avoiding that, of course. Those numbers are extraordinary. And, of course, every time you speak to a family, a mother, a child, you realise you drill it down just to an individual and you get a sense of what they're going through and what they've left behind and the normal life they had and the family and community they had. So it's very great when countries open up and are tolerant to those seeking support. But, of course, those seeking support would much rather stay in their country. So, yet again, that only comes when conflict ceases.
James, let me quickly squeeze in another question. I know that you are holding a camera, but, we are talking about refugees, but we also know that there are some that are internally displaced. I'm sure that number has now grown from the 160,000 that was reported not too long ago. Just what are they saying in as far as, their family members that are stuck in the capital city, as an example, and some in Kharkiv? What are they saying in terms of these internally displaced Ukrainians? What is actually happening with them?
It's a very good question. Everyone I speak to in places like here, as I say, which are still calm, they're very anxious for family members. They really are. I mean, I spoke to someone 20 minutes ago in my apartment, again, who managed to get here and are, as you say, internally displaced. Someone else will look after them, but they are constantly worried and trying to find support for those other family members who can't or don't want to leave those places. There's not a person I've spoken to, and I've spoken to hundreds, who haven't got that sort of a story, who, whether they are feeling positive about things or very, very gloomy, are still very worried about family members and friends in other parts of the country. It's very much a country united in that sense. But at the same time, people are finding it increasingly difficult. How do they move someone? How do they get, accommodation somewhere else? What is the best mode of transport? Are they safe where they are? All those questions that people go through. As a woman said to me at the station yesterday, she was saying, look, I realize every decision I make now is so critical. I have to make sure I get every decision right, because if I get one wrong, then the next moment I no longer have, the power in my hands. And that's really, really complicated for adults to be making those big decisions about where they go, where they stay, where
James, that's where we're going to have to leave it, I'm afraid. James, if you can hear me, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your analysis. Thank you. We have to leave it there. Thank you so much.